I'm going to be talking about the power of positive emotion. I'm a research psychologist. I'm here at Cal State East Bay. I'm in the psychology department, and I'm going to be making a plug for positive emotion. I recently wrote a book about emotion and learned about a lot about positive emotion as I wrote it, among other types of emotions as well. And I also want to kind of make a plug for science. You know, that science is helping us to learn about the power of positive emotion. For a long time, of course we all like positive emotion, I think. You know, we know that it has a lot of effects. We intuitively know that. But recently there's been a lot more research on positive emotion than there had been in the past, even in psychology, and so I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. We've also heard probably more in general about the power of positive thinking than about the power of positive emotion. It's kind of a famous expression that comes from a book that was written about 50 years ago. But I think that we also, that emotions really often drive us, you know, not only the way we think and our beliefs and so on, but our passions, our emotions drive us. So we do have to know more about emotion in order to understand our own behavior and in order to get along and so on. So scientific psychology, as I mentioned, has largely neglected emotion. It seems kind of surprising in some ways. This is since the beginning of scientific psychology, which was about late 1800s. There are some exceptions. There's been some good research in emotion in general. But much of the research in emotion really has been in the clinical domain, which makes sense. It makes sense. In the past, psychologists have studied emotion in order to try to understand how to help treat people that have emotional disorders and so on. And now, however, within the last 20 years or so, we have been studying emotion in general. Just what is it in general, and what is positive emotion and so on. How can we help with it? There's a new field in psychology, a relatively new field. It's only about 20 years old, from about 1990, positive psychology. And it's a great field. I love it. Have you guys heard of positive psychology? Okay. And it is the focus on kind of what's positive, what's the best in us. In the history of the field of psychology, it does make sense, as I kind of was saying, that we care about treating people, so we want to help people, so that much of the field, much of the history has been focused kind of on helping people with disorders. But now we are interested also in what is the best in us. The clinical psychologists now and research psychologists are working together more than ever before. So clinical psychologists are practitioners, research psychologists tend to be kind of nerdy researchers, and they didn't always talk to one another as much as we would want. But within the study of emotion, within positive psychology, these two types of psychologists are talking together, and we're learning, and we're getting a research base for some of kind of what we intuitively know about the power of positive emotion. One of my very favorite theories and areas of research in positive emotion is Barbara Fredrickson's broad and build theory. And she's at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and she and a lot of colleagues have studied positive emotion now for a while, for about the last 20 years or so. As a kind of a backdrop to this, we do tend to categorize emotions into positive and negative. Some positive ones, you probably can guess what they are, but happiness, pride, love, and so on. Negative ones, sadness, fear, anger. Fredrickson has found some differences, fundamental differences between these emotions. In general, there's a difference in perception. When someone's experiencing a negative emotion, their perception really focuses. So for example, fear. Like you have you have something coming at you that's trying to get you, like a mountain lion or something. You experience fear, and that causes your perception to really focus. So you're focused on that object, the mountain lion. Similarly with anger, something makes you mad, like someone cuts you off in traffic, and you do focus on that person. So negative emotions do cause us to focus perceptually, and an argument is that this is for survival value, that we experience the negative emotions and then we fight or flee and so on. So from that point of view, if emotions help us with survival, why do we have positive ones? So what Fredrickson theorized and has research basis for is her broaden and build theory, that positive emotions broaden our perceptions, and we see many things around us. And I'm going to explain in a second why that's functional. So she says we build resources in the long term when we have positive emotions. So for example, when we're playing, like two lion cubs playing, let's say, they're practicing skills. So they're enjoying themselves, we think animals have emotions, and they're probably enjoying themselves. And the lion cubs, like one attacks the other, is learning how to hunt. And it's getting motor skills and so on. So this positive emotion is associated with building a resource source for the future. Similarly, positive emotions build social resources, social connections. We have a positive emotion when we're having fun with other people and we bond together. This is probably the part that might be most relevant to building peace. Positive emotions building social connections. Also, though, it looks like positive emotions can build our intellectual resources too, and that can be helpful. There's some research by some colleagues, I believe, Barbara Fredrickson, where she found that children that are more securely attached to their parents, that children that feel more love from their parents, are more willing to explore environments. They are new environments, they're more curious, they explore more. And others have done research on this and found that this really does build intellectual resources. For example, they have better spatial maps in their mind of areas because of this exploration they do. So positive emotions are great. They can build our social resources for sure, connections with others, and intellectual resources. This theory may apply well to creating peace among humans, and I read that to other people maybe to make some more explicit connections. Another theory I really like is Keith Oatley's theory. He's a Canadian cognitive psychologist, and he also happens to be a psychology historian. And he takes kind of like a broader, societal perspective on emotion and its function. He says that emotions can affect societies, like even an individual's emotions can affect a whole society, sometimes like a leader's emotions. For example, a lot of pride or hubris can lead to the downfall of a nation. As in, for example, Pericles in ancient Greece tried to have a war with, I think it was Sparta, and they just didn't have the resources for the war. And so some historians say because of Pericles' hubris or pride, that's why the city-state of Athens fell. Oatley warns us about contempt. He thinks that many modern first world nations, this could be our Achilles heel. If we see the other as just nothing, worth nothing. The other could be another country, or it could be some among us, like the poor, or something like that. And he thinks that that type of emotion, basically emotion of contempt, could possibly lead to our downfall. He argues for cultivating empathy, compassion, and so on. So I mentioned compassion. I think people are going to mention compassion today. Getting back kind of though to positive thinking. So this kind of expression, the power of positive thinking, has been around a lot longer than the expression I just used on my talk, the power of positive emotion. And it comes from this man named Peel, and he wrote a book, The Power of Positive Thinking, in 1952. He was a minister, and his argument in his book was not research-based, it was sort of intuitive, and he was basically arguing that if we think positively, and act on it, we can do a lot for ourselves. We can have better relationships, we can get the job we want, and so on. And Fredrickson's research-based theory is consistent with this to some extent, that she's saying with the positive emotions we have, we can build things for ourselves. So cognitive therapists also have kind of done a lot intuitively in the past, not necessarily having a research basis to their ideas, but that now we're building research to kind of suggest that their approach is correct. That is, cognitive therapists have seen that there's a connection between emotions and thoughts. So, for example, if you're having a negative emotion, you're thinking negative thoughts. If you're having the emotion sadness, you're thinking sad thoughts. If you're having the emotion fear, you're thinking fearful thoughts. The way cognitive therapy works is actually to work on the thought patterns, and then presumably the emotions will follow. So if someone is depressed, you try to change their negative thinking pattern, and then the negative emotions, the negative emotion of sadness will follow in time. And there is some research I've seen in modern research on emotion that actually supports this idea too. It's not just intuitive. So I wanted to also, say that Oakley's people are doing research on this idea too, that positive emotions could affect like kind of a whole collective, not just individuals in therapy or an individual trying to achieve their best and so on. So in sum, philosophers, psychologists, others have been talking about and recognized the power of positive emotion and positive thinking for a long time. Now we do have some movements in psychology, positive psychology, and kind of a bigger development in studying emotion that gives research support to some of these ideas that we've had all along. So if you are interested, I recommend that you learn more about positive psychology. It's really hot in psychology right now. And I just mentioned a couple of people, I mentioned a couple of people today. There are a lot of people associated with positive psychology. But Barbara Fredrickson, who I mentioned with Broaden and Build Theory, did write 2 books for a popular audience, and it's different from, say, The Power of Positive Thinking, that book, in that she argues for positivity, but backs it up with research. Keith Oakley also has written a number of good books. So there are very many people in the positive psychology movement, and you could just look online and find various good places to read about positive psychology. So I hope it's been helpful to hear about positive emotions, and it's kind of the beginning of research on this. But there's a lot of promise, I think, for positive emotions, and it's getting along. So thank you.